Hi everyone, hope you're having a good day. What I'm going to do is we're going to read from chapter 6, which is called Maximus. The only thing you really need to know about the story so far is that our main character Danny has, since his abusive father threw him through a glass door when he was about 18 months, 2 years old, he's had the ability to capture and control whispers. And whispers, being always secretive and always powerful things, are some of the most powerful sound waves that we know. And this becomes like a kind of a telekinesis type thing in the story, but we never really refer to it as that. It's always controlling the whispers. So this is chapter 6, and this is Maximus. The storm clouds rolled in from the horizon, their shadows racing over the golden fields. The blue sky of the late evening bulldozed over by layer upon layer of angry grey clouds, crashing in from nowhere, piling up and up into the stratosphere, falling over themselves at great speed to cover the whole sky as quickly as they could, turning day into night. And lightning followed, bisecting the darkest clouds, exploding down to hit the ground in the wheat fields that extended across the horizon. Danny walked through waist-deep crops, trailing his hand through the wheat heads like he was Maximus, commander of the armies of the north. He watched the spreading blackness in the sky, flashing its lights at him. The heat was incredible, like opening an oven door, making it hard for him to breathe, and in amongst all of this, as if hidden by all the sensory stimulus, were the whispers. They rose from the wind that rustled through the dry crop. They soared up and joined the storm clouds as they rolled in overhead and echoed the shattering thunder that shook the fabric of the sky itself. They spun and twirled around him as he waded through the storm. Perhaps he shouldn't go that way, toward the mouth of the beast. Perhaps he should turn and go back toward the blue sky and the sun. But the warmth and the light had never been his thing, had it? The darkness had always been what had lured Danny, almost since day one, and certainly since a date with a glass door. Lightning crashed overhead, making landfall just in front of him, and as it faded, in its place was a man. A tall, thin man, impossibly slender, pale, gaunt, and bald, standing in the field ahead of him, dressed in a black suit. There was a familiarity about him somehow, as if Danny knew him, that they'd met before, but he couldn't place or recall when or how, if indeed they had at all. He stared at Danny, repeatedly clenching his fists at his sides and breathing heavily, as if spoiling for a fight. The wind seemed to respond to him, as did the whispers which were pouring out of his body. He tilted his head back, and a cloud of them escaped his mouth and rose up and out like its own weather system. But equally all separate, like birds flocking at roosting time, they ebbed and flowed and drifting up into the sky before sweeping down and around, the whisper formation display team surrounding and enveloping the man once again. With the slightest of hand movements, the cloud of whispers came at Danny, flying low across the top of the wheat. Suddenly they stopped. Halfway between the two of them, a floating wall, hovering, the air shimmering. He could feel the whispers inside him, yearning to go and join their counterparts, to run off and play like dogs in a field. They stayed like that, the gauntlet thrown down. "Bring your whispers, Danny." The words hung in the air. Well, no, they didn't. The words hung in his head, painted in big letters on the back of his eyelids, waiting for him to respond. They were so close inside him, insistent, demanding a response, but Danny held back. You didn't talk to strangers, and you didn't bring your whispers to play with them on their say-so either. The challenge not accepted, the man curled his lip and shrugged, waving his hand again, and the shimmering air, the whispers in the storm, returned to him, his body quivering as they re-entered like someone had grabbed him by the shoulders and was shaking some sense into him. The sky seemed to calm. The clouds slowed in their approach, the juggernaut applying the brakes, and the air pressure, which had been building as if they were on a deep dive, eased off. The man remained in front of him for a moment longer, then reached up and grasped the peak of an imaginary hat, bowing his head slightly. "See you soon." Danny woke with a start. Drenched in sweat, he rubbed some of it away from his bare chest with his hand as he propped himself up on his elbows and took in his surroundings. His bedroom was awash with whispers. Although he'd kept them under a tight leash in his dream, they'd obviously come out to play in reality and were swarming around in circles and loops, the sound waves causing vibrations on shelves and surfaces, bouncing off each other, oscillating and amplifying, a roomful of Doppler effects. Some casualties were his Obi-Wan model, which had bounced its way to the edge of the shelf and fallen to the floor, along with his NASA pendant, that had been weighed down by Brian Cox's The Planets, but the string had vibrated loose. Danny's head was pounding, the pain in his temple that always came when he let them loose and had to corral them in again. He closed his eyes, concentrating, and opened his whisper room door, calling to them. They wanted to be out, to play, to reenact gremlins and cause mayhem, but they reluctantly obeyed and slowly started to return to Danny, like kids filing back into class after lunch break, dragging their feet, taking as long as they possibly could, jostling and pushing their way in and back into their home. His room was silent again. The only dim illumination came from various standby lights on his laptop, Xbox and TV. Those tiny little bulbs did provide a red-green glow that had an old 3D horror film feel, the ones where you wore the cardboard glasses with different coloured lenses. He sat up and took a drink of water from the sports bottle on his desk next to his bed. The inside of his head had gone quiet, or as quiet as it could. The front of his mind was calm, and the only noise that could be heard was beyond the virtual door into the whisper room. But he had learnt to ignore or block out the noises coming from there. At 16, he'd had the whispers in his head for all but 2 years of his life, and it's fair to say he could keep them contained. Releasing them and controlling them when he did so was a totally different matter. But he at least had some semblance of order in his head for the most part. Tonight's dream was a new event. He'd sensed someone for a while, almost since they'd moved to Wales, to his aunt's house. At first there was nothing. Just normal settling in. Him and his mum finding their feet, starting school and work, him avoiding the knobheads, not really making many friends because if you haven't got anyone, they can't let you down, can they? And his mum getting used to work. It seemed okay. Their village was just outside of the little town of Huckley where they went to work and school. His aunt's bungalow was compact but nice enough, part of a row of similar modern buildings that backed onto the river a few hundred yards downstream from the church. Out the back was a big area of decking that led, via a little gate, to a complex series of steps and sloping decking, cut into the steep slope of the bank that took you steadily down, switching back and forth, eventually to the river, which was bliss on a warm day and midge heaven in the evenings. After they'd been there for a while, when everything that had been new and different was the norm and the same, he started to sense something that sat outside of the normal, like he was being watched all the time through a window or from some CCTV. He'd even swept his room in the house for bugs or hidden cameras, so strong was the sensation. He knew he wasn't being paranoid because it involved the whispers. Whenever he felt himself collecting new whispers, or he let them go from time to time when he was alone, mainly to get some silence in his mind, or even now when they jumped out from behind the couch of his subconscious to yell surprise while he was dreaming, he could feel something. Watching but not watching, as if he suspected he was being monitored by someone or something, but he had no idea how or why. He shivered at the thought, then put it to the back of his mind. He was slowly accumulating a lot of stuff in the back there, the whisper room, someone that was monitoring him. It was definitely the busiest part of his head. He got up and went to the bathroom, down the hall, peed and got 2 paracetamol from the cabinet. Back in bed he popped them and drank from his bottle again, flopping down on the pillow, but not before moving across to the dry side, to wait for the pills to battle the throbbing in his forehead. He thought about Nancy, lying in her bed only a couple of 100 yards away, saw her crooked smile in his mind's eye, her eyes glittering when she did so, the toss of her jet-black hair. Grabbing his phone, which lit the room up much more than some standby lights could dream of, he checked Snapchat and Insta. Nothing. Of course there was nothing, dickhead. She was probably tucked up, fast asleep in bed at 3 a.m. Except maybe she wasn't. She told him she was often awake into the small hours, and they'd messaged later than this. But his phone said she wasn't active. He pulled up some of her old messages and reread them. Nothing of any great importance or significance in there, just words from her, and it kept her voice in his head and him thinking about her. And as he read their conversations, his heart fluttered. Needing to sleep now, he randomly scrolled through some accounts he followed and liked things, rarely responding with more. The pain in his head started to recede, and in truth he forgot about it within about 5 minutes of taking the drugs. The glow of his screen creating a bubble in which he could escape, to beaches where celebrities were discussing life lessons, to pictures of new comic characters. He liked the look of this new one called Mr. Chills that was getting a lot of attention in the States, to random landscape or still life photographs that he liked. And it was within that bubble of familiar posts and pictures of warmth and light and repetitiveness that seemed to sum up the superficial fluff of social media, the one constant in amongst a world of flux that, honestly, only very occasionally featured girls in bikinis, that he fell asleep.